Welcome, everyone. My name is Ken Feudernick, and I, along with my colleague from Braver Angels, Mary Thomas Valens, will be moderating this exchange of ideas about California's high school ethnic studies course, a course that was intended to be a requirement for high school graduation. I'm the host of the podcast Courageous Conversations about our schools, and I've been an educator my entire career, and I'm now serving as a school board member in Northern California. Mary, please tell the audience about yourself.
Hi, everyone. You heard my name, Mary Thomas Fallons. I'm on the Braver Angels moderator training team, and I've started the Braver School Community Network within Braver Angels. I don't typically share this in a workshop, but pertinent to this event, I've been a public school teacher for 41 years, and I've also taught at the university level. And actually, I'm here to learn about the California Ethnic Studies course because I don't really know that much about it, to be honest.
Well, thank you, Mary. Again, I want to welcome all of you who have joined as audience members. We have had about 297 people sign up for this event, and many more will have a chance to view or listen to the recorded versions of today's conversation when we post them on our websites. And even though we're talking about California's ethnic studies course, it seems many others around the country are interested in the same topic. And Paige, if you would bring up the slide, it shows that if you see the map on the left there, it shows the where people are from. That was updated a couple days ago. So if you're looking at that map and saying, "Well, I'm from Kansas and I don't see my my pointer there," it's because it wasn't updated. And on the right, you can see the breakdown in terms of roles. It's pretty, a lot of parents and teachers, some school board members, and a few students, journalists, administrators, and policymakers. Let me just say that if you think this fishbowl format we are following for our discussion today was helpful, we urge you in your local school communities to invite interested parties to have similar exchanges where high priority is placed on listening and curiosity, things that are really important to what I do on my podcast and certainly to Braver Angels. Mary, will you say just a bit about the fishbowl format and why we selected this format for today?
Of course. While our panelists have different views about the ethnic studies, we don't want this to be a debate. Well-run debates have their place, and Braver Angels has conducted many of them. Sometimes a goal among debaters is to win or score points over the other side. But our purpose here today is not to see who wins, but to help us all better understand the issues at stake and why people hold different views, and to see what if we can uncover common ground. And while I said I don't know much about it, it's because this course has been evolving. I've heard about it, know it's out there, but because I taught elementary school, I need the details. So that's where we'll be listening to you today.
Today, we're going to start by having four people who support California's ethnic studies course in a virtual fishbowl. Everyone else will be observing from the outside. I have an update, by the way, about one of the panelists who was going to be in the group that is speaking in favor of ethnic studies. It was Jose Medina, the author of the California bill that established the ethnic studies graduation requirement back in 2021, called yesterday to say he had a scheduling conflict. It would be unable to join us. We fortunately have an alternate, Karen Ridley, who's a teacher who's enthusiastically agreed to join the other three people who will speak in favor of the ethnic studies course. Each panelist is going to be allowed 5 uninterrupted minutes to share his or her view on the topic. And in the spirit of intellectual humility, we've also asked the panelists to use some of their 5 minutes addressing the potential downside of their position, perhaps some unintended consequences that could occur. After that, we will bring in 4 people who are deeply concerned about the state's ethnic studies course. They also will each have 5 uninterrupted minutes to share their views on the topics. As you and the audience are listening, we invite you to jot down any questions you might have for the people in the fishbowl. When they are finished, we will post a link in the chat to a form you can use to submit a question. Mary will select a few of them and pose them to the panelists. And any that we don't get to that you've submitted, we will be posting later and asking panelists to respond to in writing. And when we share with you the link to the video of this event, we will also include the responses to some of the questions that we didn't get to. I'm going to toss it back to you, Mary, and have you talk about Braver Angels and in the Braver Way.
Okay. Braver Angels is the nation's largest cross-partisan volunteer-led movement to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. That's right from their website. The skills I've learned and those that we've shared have been with teachers, students, parents, administrators, school board members, and the public at large. And they've served to give these stakeholders the tool for more productive conversation, especially with hot topics. As I've met people from across the country and across the political spectrum, our Braver Angels work has actually given me hope for bringing people together during these divided times. What you see on the screen are principles we strive to operate by engaging when we engage with each other. We've asked our panelists to do the best that they can today, and especially with number two. We treat people who we disagree with honesty, dignity, and respect. And I also want to just mention number five. If we disagree, let's disagree accurately, avoiding exaggeration and stereotypes. So back to you, Ken.
As many of you know and may have experienced yourself in some civic space like a school board meeting, exchanges with the public are not always civil. Some use the public comment time to excoriate and demean their leaders, and sometimes use, I'll call it, colorful language. Sometimes board members or city council members do the same towards each other. These confrontations draw lots of attention from the media, but they seldom lead to solutions that benefit their constituents. Incidentally, as you will hear in a moment from journalist John Fensterwald, these kinds of bitter confrontations have occurred in some school board meetings in California where ethnic studies was being discussed. I want to share something with you that you see on the screen. I mentioned something I learned from Tim Shriver, who was someone I interviewed for my podcast. He helped create something called the Dignity Index. He said that when we treat our opponents with contempt, it seldom solves the problems we care about. In fact, he says what usually happens is that we make enemies for our cause. Well, I mentioned at the outset as I introduced myself that I'm now a school board member in a county where contemptuous language and colorful language has been used in civic spaces. To try to prevent that from happening in our school board meetings, we agreed to add this language that you see on the screen. We've asked our panelists to follow the Brave Way principles, by the way, which includes a reference to dignity that Mary just talked about. So you see the sentence on the screen, and we read that before every public comment section in our school board meetings. And it's just a reminder to all of us, including the board members, that that's how we're going to regard one another, not that we're going to avoid disagreements. Okay. Now to help us better understand the history of California's ethnic studies course, I'm going to bring in John Fensterwald. I mentioned him a moment ago. He's a veteran journalist at EdSource, who's been following this story for several years. John, thanks so much for joining us today and providing some background on the topic. If you would, say a bit about yourself and what you have been doing at EdSource for so many years.
Yeah, thanks, Ken, for inviting me. EdSource writes about policy and news in California. It's been around for 50 years, and I've been not that long, but I've been there 12 years, and I've been covering education, policy, and news in California full time about 16 years.
Yeah, great. I know you've been following the ethnic studies course story for several years. Can you take us back to 2021? And I know the story goes back before that, but if you'd start there and talk about the bill when it was first introduced in the legislature, and just give us a little update on what's been happening with it.
Yeah, thanks. A lot's been happening as you'll hear tonight. And with the passage of Assembly Bill 101 by Jose Medina, California became the first state to require ethnic studies as a high school graduation requirement. And the intent of that was to help students understand the past and present struggles of primarily the primary four ethnic and racial groups in California: Black, Asian, Latino, Native American, Indigenous, but also other groups in their own communities. And districts would be required to take a semester-long course starting this fall, 25, 26, and as a graduation requirement in 2029, 30.
So, John, when the bill was first introduced and ultimately passed and signed by the governor, was there quite a bit of support for it? Was there bipartisan support, or was it pretty contentious?
Yeah, but it was a very popular bill, and overwhelmingly passed both houses, Senate and Assembly. And outwardly, at least, there was great hope and optimism. Let me quote Gavin Newsom when it was passed. He said, "I value the role ethnic studies plays in helping students think critically about our history and understand the experience of marginalized communities in the state. This academic discipline will help prepare our young adults to become civically engaged and participate fully in our democracy." But even with those good words, there were already tensions around ethnic studies that foreshadowed the conflicts over what ethnic studies should be as a course. And let me back you up. You said it started sooner, and it sure did.
Hmm.
It started in 2016 when the legislature passed a bill which set up not a mandate at that point, but a course, a curriculum, the model curriculum for this course. And it took 5 years till it was passed, 6 months before the passage of AB 101. The state board approved it, and there were multiple revisions, tens of thousands of comments, and a lot of dissension. The law creating that framework was really ecumenical and short. It said it would produce content and lesson plans to teach ethnic studies, and the ideal was to make all students become global citizens with an appreciation for the contributions and multiple cultures. But keep in mind, there are no state standards in ethnic studies in California, as opposed to many other subjects. So you would have a model curriculum, but those lessons would be voluntary. And so ultimately, perhaps much to the relief of the legislature, all the decisions for creating that content would be made at the local level by 1,000 districts and 12 and hundreds of school boards. And so the framework itself not only included lessons for the four primary groups, but also in Jewish Americans and Sikhs and Arab Americans. The key is the framework's first draft was created by high school ethnic studies teachers and professors and instructors from the University of California and California State University. That's what the law required, that they be those drafters. But state officials, President of the State Board, Linda Darling Hammond, State Superintendent Tony Thurman, and the governor, after seeing the first draft, they ordered that it be rewritten with different authors. And they complained that the framework was really focused too much on the continuing harmful legacies of white supremacy, capitalism, and colonialism, and too much attention to people like Angela Davis and not enough to John Lewis and other figures in the civil rights movement. And so it also became a key factor. It stressed the boycott on Israel as an oppressor state and contained, they found what the critics found were biased and prejudicial perspectives, and sort of basically summed up by their criticism that it taught you what to think and not how to think.
John, so it was.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
I was just going to say it was, there's bipartisan support back in 2021, at least relatively speaking, as bills go. Just give us a couple of important updates
Yeah.
about what's happened since then and why it's become contentious. And then I do want you to note to people that have reminded me that it, in fact, today is not a requirement, and I want you to explain why.
Yeah. Uh, it's not why, because one of the last amendments to having gone through the framework, legislators added two important caveats. One, it said, quote, "It is not the intent of the legislature that school, it is the, I'm sorry, it is the intent of the legislature that school districts not use the portions of the draft that were adopted due to concerns related to bias, bigotry, and discrimination." That was to set the stage for the conflicts over the past 5 years. And it also said this law will take effect upon appropriation, meaning you have to fund it, and then the mandate goes into effect. And here we are, actually 5 years later, there has not been any funding for this, including in the current state budget, although everybody knew this was the deadline to fund it.
And I was going to ask you about a bill
Yeah.
that came up more recently. It was, I think, intended to mitigate some of the problems of Jose Medina's bill. It's AB 715. Can you just say just something very briefly about that bill and what it's about?
Yeah, Assembly Bill 715 was proposed by two members of the Legislative Jewish Caucus, and it would define anti-Semitism and enhance the existing protections to prevent anti-Semitism. It would create a new Office of Anti-Semitism Prevention Coordinator to track complaints and provide training and resources. And that's important. Maybe, I mean, if it's actually up in the air, Ken, as we speak. Within the next couple of days, we'll know what happened to that bill. It's been opposed by the teachers union and the ethnic studies communities because they think it will chill freedom of expression. But on the other hand, I suspect, I don't hold me to it, I suspect that passage might soften some of the opposition to the mandate, but we'll see if it passes.
Yeah. So as of right now, districts are not required, at least by the state, to make it a graduation requirement because it wasn't funded. But it isn't it also the case that districts are permitted to make it a requirement in some, like San Francisco Unified, LA Unified, Oakland Unified, have made it a graduation requirement. Isn't that right, John?
Yeah, well, a lot of them, not necessarily, there's some have made it a graduation requirement. Certainly, many districts have created curriculums and gone ahead and introduced courses.
Mhm.
Many are successful and with the goal, and it's created conflicts as well. But again, many districts with the anticipation that it would become a mandate have gone ahead and done it. And even before the law was passed, over the past decade, there have been many, many districts that have adopted ethnic studies on their own.
Yeah. All right. John, thank you so much for providing the background. I think it really helps clarify in the minds, especially if people may be out of state. But even Mary was saying, my co-moderator, she was here to learn, and I've learned from you as well about some of the nuances of how this idea has been evolving in California. So thank you.
I'm looking forward to the discussion, Ken.
Okay, great. Uh, Now I'd like to ask the four panelists who support the ethnic studies course to turn on their video, and we have four people, and I'm going to ask one at a time to have 5 minutes to share their views, and I'm going to begin with Al Camarillo. Dr. Camarillo has been a member of the Stanford University History Department since 1975 and is widely regarded as one of the founding scholars in the field of Mexican American history and Chicano studies. So, Dr. Camarillo, you get to talk about why you support the ethnic studies course, and we're eager to hear what you have to say.
Yes, thank you. And first, thank you to you, Ken, and Mary, and your organizations for sponsoring this event, engaging in conversations about something as fundamental as the curriculum that will be and in some places already offered in California high schools. As a way of a little bit of background briefly, I had the good fortune many, many years ago of being among that very small cohort of students of color who were admitted to, in my case, UCLA in the late 1960s, and being exposed to the very first courses ever offered in what we now call ethnic studies. But as a historian, as a history major, I was exposed to Black history for the first time, to Mexican American history, to Asian American history, Native American history, and the histories of other immigrant groups, Jewish Americans, Italian. And for me, it was transformative because it gave me a perspective not only about myself, which is important as a Mexican American, as a member of one of the largest ethnic groups in the state, but it gave me an appreciation to understand the history, the culture, the trials and tribulations of all these groups that are part of our American heritage. I also had the good fortune of becoming one of the first professors of Mexican American history, Latino history in the United States, and the great privilege of teaching for almost 45 years, thousands and thousands of Stanford University students as an American historian, but about ethnic and racial diversity in America's past. And I can tell you, this is the basis for why years later, within the last 15 years, towards the last 15 years of my career, after having that exposure to students that were understanding something they knew very little bit about going through high school before they came to college, that is about our ethnic and racial heritage of this country. And to see how it engaged them, it made them better students, it made them more engaged citizens of the states, of the nation. And for me, that was, as an educator, that was profound because they were now absorbing something that made them more aware of the amazing diversity that existed within our society. And it was in those last 15 years of my career at Stanford when I said, I want to see if we take this kind of history, ethnic studies writ large, into the high schools, could it have the same impact on our students in arguably the most diverse state in one of the most diverse nations ever created on the face of the earth, the United States and California? So I piloted and collaborated with a couple teachers over the course of 15 years in 2 local high schools, and I saw it again. Students were engaged, and this is across the board, not just students of color, but other students across the board. They became more respectful and more knowledgeable about ethnic, cultural, religious diversity among the students, that there are classmates, and a critical sensibility about the past and how it relates to the present, and a greater understanding of our democracy, our incredibly diverse democracy. And that's when I realized this is something that would be profoundly important to give all of our students in the state of California in high school the same opportunity these students at universities across the country that for the last 50 to 60 years have had exposure to ethnic studies curricula. And that's
I don't want to interrupt you. We forgot to mention the timer. You have about a minute to maybe get your second question.
Okay.
So any concerns or reservations about the ethnic studies course?
So while I am eagerly supportive of ethnic studies mandate and its inclusion in high school curricula, I do have concerns because I'm concerned that teachers are overworked. I just had a workshop of 12 students from Bay Area high schools, veteran teachers of ethnic studies. One of my takeaways from that and one of my concerns is that we have to, as a state, develop more resources so that it's easier for our teachers who are doing an incredible amount of work to be able to consider offering these courses or building on the huge body of literature that we have in ethnic studies so that they can then translate that to the curriculum in their schools for their high school students. So that's it's funding and resources at the same time that I'm very concerned about.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Camaria. Really appreciate your sharing your perspectives on that. Next, we're going to come to Samantha Garcia. Samantha is a recent high school graduate from Compton, California, which is where I think Dr. Ken Murillo grew up also. Uh, Samantha, we're eager to hear what you have to say.
Hello, my name is Samantha Garcia Lejo. First of all, I just want to thank you all for having me here. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity. But like you mentioned, I am a recent high school graduate and I am now a current first year at Cal State Long Beach. So to answer the first question, I am an avid believer that ethnic studies is not only a positive thing, but it's a necessary thing. Because I can tell you from firsthand experience that ethnic studies does stimulate critical thinking. It pushes students to approach history with open-mindedness, which is something that is often missing in traditional high school courses. And I find it too often that the standard curriculum overlooks the voices and stories of underrepresented groups in the United States. When I took ethnic studies, I actually felt seen, especially when the material reflected experiences of Mexican Americans. And I can tell you this, that for many classmates and I, this was the first time a class actually connected to our own lives, life experiences, and upbringings. The sense that recognition is powerful and is something every student deserves to experience. The value of ethnic studies, I believe, goes beyond representation. I think it challenges the Eurocentric lens that dominates core classes like US history, world history, and even government. And instead, I think that this encourages students to understand history from different angles. It pushes them to really see how much history is diverse. They can see the diversity in society, history most importantly. And in fact, I think that this doesn't just enrich students' education, but it can also inspire civic engagement and motivate them to take an active role in their community. So I think
Can
that
you?
requiring ethnic studies, sorry.
Oh,
Carmen,
I
if I
also want to
could do.
give you time. Can you share any concerns you have? You support ethnic studies, but can you share some ways it may go wrong or unintended consequences about the course?
Um, yeah. So one concern that I do think ethnic studies does have is how prepared faculty is. Just because I know that ethnic studies can be a pretty heavy, demanding workload type of course, meaning that it does push students to look at history throughout a non-traditional lens. And, some faculty members just may not have enough preparedness for that because of funding. So I do think that if there is a process in which faculty are, um, you know, prepared and trained to teach an ethnic studies course, that would then give some reassurance to not only the students, but even parents and communities in general. Because after all, ethnic studies is meant to bridge communities together and fight apathy.
Samantha, thank
Got
you
it. Thank you.
so much. I want to remind all of the audience out there is about 150 people connected right now, and more. We'll see this later. But if you have a question for the group that is speaking, be sure to jot it down, and you will have a chance when all four are done to submit it in a. There will be a link in the chat where it will bring up a form and you can submit your question. Next, I also speaking in favor of ethnic studies is Karen Ridley. Karen was kind enough to serve as an alternate for the panel, and it turned out we had to press her into service. For those tuning in a bit late, I had noted earlier that Jose Medina's office informed me yesterday that he was unable to participate because of scheduling conflicts. And Karen, by the way, has spent 26 years teaching English language arts at Loara High School in Anaheim, California, where she's recognized for her commitment to equity, literacy, and student empowerment. She's the author of the Anaheim Union School District's Upper Division English Language Arts Ethnic Studies course called The Racial and Social Justice of Ethnic Studies. And she is certified in ethnic studies by the California Department of Education. Welcome, Karen. We're eager to hear what you have to say.
So much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you all for inviting me and including me on this important conversation. As Ken said, I do teach in Anaheim. We are a district that requires ethnic studies for graduation. And I'll talk about that a little bit with my concerns later on. So yes, I do support ethnic studies being a requirement, especially at the secondary level, because this class is transformational. And I think that teaching this class has given me perspectives into my own students that have helped me transform as a teacher. It puts everything, you put the onus into the students. I'm a white lady walking into an ethnic studies class. I recognize the privilege I bring. I recognize the lack of diversity in my own life experiences that my students come with. And so this is one of those classes where at the end of the year, the students tell me, I felt seen, I felt heard, I felt I could be myself in that classroom. Because it's really a year-long dialogue. I like to think of all education as a dialogue, and my students are that dialogue. I'm the facilitator of the dialogue. And really, we have an integrated approach in our district. So the integrated thematic approach stresses the importance of identifying shared struggles, building unity, civic engagement, and developing intercultural communication and competence. And so we kind of I've divided that up. I did consult ethnic caucuses within my own teacher groups to, of course, build this curriculum. This was not a silo that I worked in. This was not done by just me. I put it all together. But it's that constant interaction between different groups, different marginalized groups, to get input on this course. And that's something I think that that all the school districts need to acknowledge, is that it can't be done by one person. It needs to be a team. It needs to be a community effort. And so we sort of think that, so our focus, or we pay particular attention to institutionally and historically marginalized and racialized communities. And we try to engage students in the English class, of course, with literary analysis, argument, inferential evaluation of text, the same content standards that you would bring into an English class, but you do it through the lens of ethnic studies. And at times I felt like I was teaching two different subjects, but you know, it really has, we focus on agency, voice, and choice in our district. And while the requirements are really, you know, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, AAPI communities, and and Latinx communities, there really is a lot of freedom in our district to cater our curriculum to the specific demographic that we teach. So for instance, we have Little Arabia in Anaheim. So our schools closest to that area have adopted much more and added that to their curriculum. So our curriculum is very fluid, and I wrote it to be particularly fluid because if we really want our students to engage in the conversation, they have to see themselves in the conversation. And I've taught English like that even when I don't teach ethnic studies. And so I think this is an experience that forces all of us to face our biases, which shouldn't be a negative experience, by the way. In fact, when I was first forced to face my own biases, it inspired me to do better, and it inspired me to do this work. And it has inspired kids who year in and year out tell me, your class made me think. I'm more open-minded after leaving this class because of the discussions I had with my peers, because I heard other people's voices, because I heard people talk about their experiences. And so I think that's something to really keep in mind, is that this is supposed to be an inspiring experience. And again, all of us facing our biases, and we all have biases, we need to come to terms with that. And the real way we make change is by addressing those and learning, becoming aware of our biases. We can't always change them right away. Yeah.
Karen, do you want to address question 2?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, so my concerns, of course, are that districts are rolling this out far too quickly. I won't name any specific districts, but I get concerned that this becomes a check the box class, as I've seen even happen in my own site, where it's okay, we're going to send this person to 4 quote unquote trainings, but the people teaching it have never necessarily had to be faced with their own biases before walking into a room and teaching about bias or facilitating conversations about bias. And so my real concern again is the preparedness. I also am concerned about people who are concerned about ethnic studies, and we need to have more conversation about that. There are not enough conversations. We can't shut down conversation. We have to take people's concerns and validate them, because without that education or without that understanding, people only know what they've heard. So we really have to be better as educators at educating the public, at educating others with welcoming, inclusive conversations versus the kind of conversations where we exclude, or I don't want to use the word cancel, but immediately demonize before acknowledging that people might have valid concerns.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. And our final panelist speaking in favor of ethnic studies is Summer Johnson. Summer is a teacher of ethnic studies at Arise High School in the Fruitvale area of Oakland, California. Arise is a charter school that's been serving her neighborhood, or this neighborhood, for 17 years. Welcome, Summer.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about the ethnic studies graduation requirement. This is something that I discuss with my students every year. It's part of my curriculum to talk about what students think about the course and the requirement of the course. So ethnic studies has been at my school for about 5 years now. And I picked it up from the previous teacher. This has been a subject I've always wanted to teach and been really excited to teach, because even though it wasn't called ethnic studies when I was a student, I was really transformed by courses that were very similar to ethnic studies, where my identities were very centered and very valued. These were the classes in high school where I was leaning in and I was actually participating, and I felt really empowered to learn about history, because it felt like it was really relevant and connected to my life and my life experiences. The thing that I really am most passionate about ethnic studies is the pedagogy itself, is how it's taught and what are the outcomes for students that have been researched, and how students feel in the classroom when they're learning in ethnic studies classrooms. When it's implemented as it was intended, I think I see that transformation happening every day. When students come into my classroom, they say, "What is this class?" I say, "This class is about you." And something that I really want to emphasize in my classroom is resilience, resistance, and healing, and understanding ourselves better than when we walked into the classroom. I really see a transformation in students' confidence, their writing skills, their reading skills, their critical analysis. And I just think that that is so important for our students to think about history and not just learn history and absorb information and absorb facts. Students are actually active participants in the history, and we're making connections to how did that happened back then connect to me now? How did that affect my family? How did that affect my neighbor who has nothing in common with me? And it just gets students to be more active in the learning process. Um, it changed my life and made me want to be a teacher, learning history in this way. And I think it's just really important that students see themselves in the classroom, not even for their own self-confidence, but to be like active citizens in this country, to be democratic participants. They need to understand the complexity of the history of this country, not just one perspective, and knowing that there are always more perspectives to consider, I think is something really valuable. And for that, I think that, maybe one day we won't need ethnic studies. Right now, I think that we still need it. I think that this is something that really should be taught and a pedagogy that should be implemented, because it seems like it is what we need right now, considering all of the polarization, considering the climate around history and how that's going to be remembered. I really do think it's really good today. So,
would you like to address question two?
yes. similar to the other panelists, I have similar concerns around implementation, around teacher preparation, not all educators feeling equipped to teach this. I think if you've never gone through an ethnic studies course yourself, how do you teach it? And so I think like we need to be offering ongoing support, mentoring, classes for teachers, professional development, and just really pushing all history teachers to think about how we want to prevent this oversimplification of history, ensuring we maintain rigor. I know that that's a huge concern around ethnic studies, and that we think about the diverse perspectives whenever we're looking at history. And so the requirement isn't perfect. No education policy is, but I think if it's rolled out thoughtfully, we've seen it improves academic outcomes, we've seen it prepare students, and we've seen that students lean in and learn a lot from
Yeah.
this course. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Summer, and to the whole panel. Now stay where you are, because now we're going to ask the audience to go to the chat and click on the link, which will take you to a form where you can submit a question. We're just asking you to indicate where you're from so we have a sense of where the questions are coming from, and then what your in your name, if you'd like to put it in, and then what your question is. And they'll come in and Mary sees them and she'll select a few and she'll pose those to you. If they're directed to a particular person, you can respond. If they happen to be to the whole group, just raise your hand and let me know. So we're going to pause for just a second while people come in. Mary, are there questions coming in yet?
Not yet, but
It probably will take a moment. We just turned the chat on.
here we go. I do have one here. And okay, the way it's coming out to me, I'm going to have to scroll. So
You can hang on just once, Mary, just give it about 20
okay.
seconds for people to, so that when you start reading them, they're not still submitting their questions.
Yeah, I hope I get all this in. So let me know when you want me to start then.
Yeah, let's just wait another 10 seconds.
Okay, okay. Okay, this will help me expand the questions because they're rapid.
Okay, do you have one ready to go?
I do. Fact, someone shared, actually, this question was brought up by two different people from Poway and from Los Angeles. The 2020 US Census identified over 1,270 distinct ethnic groups in California, with nearly 1,500 detailed categories for race and ethnicity. That includes groups like hold on, I'm going to scroll this more to see it. Irish, Lebanese, Armenian. I apologize if there's more to that question. That's as much as I'm seeing. My guess is the question is probably saying, how do you address all those cultures? And I apologize if I didn't characterize the question appropriately.
I think that's it's an interesting question. I think that the bill itself named 4 groups, and this person indicated that there's hundreds, maybe over 1,000. Anyone want to respond to that? And how do you, if we think we understand the gist of the question, just raise your hand and I'll. Al Camarillo?
It's a good question because we do live in an incredibly diverse society. Now, the origins of ethnic studies has been mentioned. Ken, you've mentioned as well. The foundation is based on understanding these major groups historically, right? The 4 groups that we've mentioned. But I think it was Karen that acknowledged, and I think everyone else that does this work, acknowledges that at the local community level, when teachers have the opportunity to take ethnic studies and expose the students in their particular area to the particular diversity in their city, their district, there's a fluidity to ethnic studies to allow that to happen. And I think it's one of the beauties of the elasticity of the curriculum, so that teachers can include other groups in addition to the other 4. Now, it makes it difficult, but it is one of the things that allows an educator to expand the demography, if you will, of the groups that are being talked about, being studied.
And your point out is underscores what a couple of you have said, which if you're going to do that, it requires some time to do research and to develop a course that can be inclusive of the uh, ethnic groups in a particular city. And that doesn't happen without some work and without some time to do that research. Mary, do you have another question for the
Yeah,
panel?
there's a couple questions and maybe more because the questions go down quickly with concern about the pro-ethnic settings being anti-Jewish, and another question about is the Holocaust taught and are Jews mentioned in it? So there is concern about anti-Semitism. Some people even think it's by design. So anybody who would like to
Anyone want
respond?
to address that question?
Karen has her hand
Karen,
up.
please.
Hi. So, absolutely, this is a concern. Um, and to be honest, the first time when I wrote this, I did not include, world conflicts in my curriculum. But as they came up last year, we talked about them and we talked about the nuance of world conflict, to be honest. And, I really did bring in a lot of material about anti-Semitism. I brought in, anti-Arab sentiment. I really did bring in um, sources and resources and really did try to actually shift the conversation a lot of these students were having, which was very unnuanced and they're very passionate, but very emotional without a lot of, again, without a lot of historical context, without a lot of nuance. And what I tried to do in those situations is really teach the students more about how we think critically about things and how we accept the civility and nuance of these conversations, that they're not simplistic, that it's not just, I'm going to boycott this because of this. And I really tried to, center that in them, that we can have conversations about this and not be anti-Semitic. We can, and I really tried to enforce that. I know that there are certain groups. I know that there's an Orange County district that was just recently called out for the anti-Semitism in the curriculum. But I can tell you that in Anaheim, by design, we actually have Jewish members on our ethnic studies steering committee to kind of ensure that that is not happening. There are many of us teaching ethnic studies too that, again, don't want, we don't want that to be, the main emphasis is on one country over another. I mean, this isn't the role that we play. And when we're teaching economic disparity, systemic disparity, when we're teaching about colonization, and we're teaching about these major concepts, students can kind of come to their own conclusions. But I think those concerns are absolutely valid because I've seen and heard them. I've seen colleagues make statements and it's troublesome. And I think what we need to do is make sure that we engage these students, right? We need to engage our students and acknowledge that they have feelings and everything is valid. And we also need to teach them how to have nuanced discussion. And I think that's part of what I've done.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to respond to the question of how you keep bigotry out of the classroom, no matter what group may be targeted? Summer, you talked about how it's intended to be inspiring and uniting, and the question suggests that it could be divisive, and it could be there could be a degree of bigotry that is conveyed either purposely or not. How do school districts avoid having ethnic studies do that, or ethnic studies teachers do that?
That question was directed at me,
Yeah,
right?
just if you
Okay.
want to respond to it.
Sure. I think that I work at a charter school, uh, just to be clear. And so while we're a part of the Oakland Unified School District, we're not bound by the same restrictions and things like that. I think for me, the way that I address bigotry is that we discuss like forms of oppression. And as it relates to the other question, anti-Semitism is one of those forms of oppression that we talk about. the students in the community that I'm in don't even know about a lot of communities that they don't see on the day to day. And I think operate from what they've seen on social media, stereotypes, and kind of generalizing statements about communities. And so, how we talk about it is, first of all, we want to avoid generalizing statements and stereotypes and see people as individuals with individual experiences, but maybe shared communities, shared culture, some shared values. But that individuality is something that we really want to emphasize, and our stories are something that we want to emphasize. Um, I think it is a misconception that it's anti-Semitic by design. I think by design, we're looking at and analyzing forms of oppression, and that's all forms of oppression. And we can all either participate in those or resist those in different ways. And so, another reason I love ethnic studies is because of that complexity that Karen was referring to. But that's how I address it, is talking about what we can do on our own level and how we with people who are different from us.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have a really important question to address. And how do students who are not typically marginalized respond to this course? And a related question is, my granddaughter, who's mixed race, white in Ethiopia, is shut down when race is discussed in high school. How do you avoid that? So one, that feeling of, well, I'm white or whatever, what do you have for me? I've interpreted that question. So if you heard it differently, you can respond differently.
Summer, yeah, please.
Yeah, I definitely want to speak to that because this comes back to that implementation concern that I have. And that should never happen to a student in the classroom. A student should not feel shut down or be told by their teacher that that they don't have culture. Even folks who are white have culture. Folks who are mixed have culture and have histories and have important life experiences that are distinct from others. And they should be given the space to explore those in the classroom. That to me is what ethnic studies is. And that makes me sad to hear that that was your child's experience and is not what ethnic studies is to me. Even white students have culture and identity pieces to explore.
All right, I'm going to leave it there, and we're going to shift now to, I'm going to thank all of you, and thank you for the questions. We're going to do our best to have the panelists respond to questions later that Mary didn't have a chance to ask, but I'm going to shift now and bring in the panelists who are concerned about ethnic studies. All right, Tab, you're up first.
Okay, and if you don't mind, I'm actually going to take the questions in reverse. I'm going to start off with concerns I have with my own position, and I am opposed to a mandate for high school graduation in ethnic studies. So my greatest concern, and it was brought up, I think, by a couple of the panelists before, is we live in the most diverse country on the planet, objectively the most diverse country. And I don't ever want to create the impression that we, meaning Americans, Californians, conservatives, whatever, reject, ignore, or belittle any other culture. So I don't support anything that ever goes to that. One of the greatest benefits I ever had going to college, competing internationally in athletics, and working around the world teaching public policy has been learning and participating in other cultures. I grew up in a tiny little rural town without any interaction or very little interaction with different people and backgrounds. We learned about cultures, we read about cultures, but we didn't experience them. And that gave me a narrow and not entirely accurate view of the world, including my own world. So studying and living with people from other cultures and countries gave me both a better understanding and a greater appreciation for my own culture as well as cultures in other places. However, the interaction was what created the impact. I didn't get it out of a book. I didn't get it out of a class. And that leads me to my opposition, which is really three elements: practical, ideological, and historical. From a practical standpoint, I think not only is it non-essential, it takes away from the core mission of our schools, which, if we really break it down, we spend $130 billion a year on schools in California, and yet virtually every metric is going downhill. The legislature, even this year, despite that giant budget, decided not to fund ethnic studies. So clearly the legislature on the whole has not seen it as a priority. So I think we all have to agree that we need kids to attend school, to be safe in school, and to learn at school. And kids are not in school right now. 1 out of 4 California students are chronically absent. In LA Unified School District, which somebody mentioned before, that number is even higher. 1/3 of students are chronically absent. You can't learn if you're not there. Second, many of our schools are not safe. We're not focused and investing enough in safety in schools. There's an 80% increase in violence against teachers in 2023. Violence against or by students has doubled at LA Unified School District in the last 3 years. 1 in 4 students report that they have considered suicide, with bullying by teachers as well as other students being the top reasons. And California is right now ranked 37th in safety. And then secondly, kids aren't learning. California is ranked 40th in academics nationally. In 2015, Senate Bill 172 eliminated the academic competency test for graduation. And yet you want to add a new mandate for graduation. School administrators have also lowered grading. And in some districts, like Oceanside Unified School District, have a policy that even if you don't turn in the homework, you start with a 50% grade. And because they have lowered grading standards, that means you cannot fail a class even if you don't show up or don't do any work. 64% of California students are not proficient in math. A bare majority are proficient in English. And a recent study showed that fewer than 20% can pass the same citizenship test that immigrants have to pass to become citizens. Secondly is ideologically. Education policy should not be a platform for social or political activism. And obviously this extends beyond just ethnic studies. So instead of having teachers focus on teaching, they're being pushed to be bureaucrats, counselors, parents, and ethicists. And I think somebody mentioned, I think it was Dr. Camarillo, that a lot of teachers are overworked already. And you want to add another mandate for which they're unprepared. 17% of California teachers are not certified in the classes they speak. So they're teaching subjects to which they are not experts. And then there are new studies that show fewer people want to become teachers, with violence and bureaucracy being 2 of the top 4 reasons. And some studies also show that social programming is changing the demographic of what motivates people to become teachers. Those who were passionate about education, like critical thinking, poetry, writing, math, science, they're looking for other options. But now more and more people who are studying to become teachers state that they want to influence the social attitude of students. And then finally, ideologically, the framework itself is deeply flawed. And despite the fact that we went through some corrections from the very radical origins of it, it still relies heavily on identity politics, divisive rhetoric, and really anti-Western philosophies. Because it's a state mandate, or if it becomes a state mandate, it focuses on very limited number of, and this was already brought up by a number of other people, very monolithic examples of ethnic groups. But if you talk about the Asian culture, am I at 4?
You're about 5 minutes, sir. I mean, you're past your time.
I am past my time. Okay. Well, those are the reasons, primarily practical, ideological, and historical,
right,
that I oppose this.
All right. Thank you, Tab. Next, we're going to hear from Wen-Yuan Wu, who is the Executive Director of the Californians for Equal Rights Foundation. Previously, Dr. Wu was Director of Administration at the Asian American Coalition for Education. She holds a PhD in International Studies from the University of Miami. Welcome, Dr. Wu.
Thank you for having me today. My organization has been involved on the opposing side since late 2020. We started with analyzing 4 successive drafts of the ethnic studies model curriculum. Then we worked with a number of organizations across the country to build a bipartisan alliance against the mandate in AB 101. Our coalition grew to 28 organizations. We were able to demonstrate the broad and diverse base of opposition. In 2021, my organization and 3 San Diego parents also sued the California Department of Education to stop 2 problematic chants in the finalized state model. In 2022, the Department of Education voluntarily entered into a settlement with us and agreed to remove these prayers. This being said, I'd like to primarily focus on the research and local implementation of ethnic studies. In September 2021, a quantitative study on longer-term academic benefits of ethnic studies was published by the National Academy of Sciences. A day later, the state legislature passed AB 101. This study suffers from inherent limitations and debilitating biases. It draws from a narrow sample size with an overrepresentation of certain demographic groups. Consequently, the generalizability of its research result is low. The authors admitted, and I quote, "Our results do not necessarily speak to the impact of the course for students who had a higher GPA," unquote. The scholars also acknowledged the endogeneity on benefits of ethnic studies on credits earned. In an ideal world, ethnic studies should and can be taught constructively, but in reality, the local level implementation, as I have observed in dozens of California school districts, is often littered with left-leaning pedagogical influences, to say the least. For instance, the ethnic studies course in Santa Ana Unified talks about, and I quote, "providing an emancipatory education that will inspire students to seek social justice and become politically conscious," unquote. Similar examples throughout the state abound. I have interviewed many parents, board members, and students across the state. Many I spoke to pointed out the GPA inflating effect of taking ethnic studies as long as students toe the line, they get the credit. This is consistent with the reservations expressed by the pro side of the researchers. Several students expressed concerns regarding the replacement of traditional and more rigorous courses such as English 9 with ethnic studies. As far as my concerns regarding my perspectives, I think it would be a wonderful thing if ethnic studies could really be taught to prepare students to be global citizens with appreciation for the contributions of multiple cultures as required by law in AB 2016. Aside from intellectual and empirical disagreements, I have based my opposition on some discrepancies between the movement's critique of capitalism and its proponents' documented profiteering activities. Let me illustrate this latter point. In 2021, Salinas Union High School District entered a contract with one of the original authors for the model curriculum for the scholar to assist in developing an ethnic studies program at an hourly rate of $1,500. Similarly, the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Institute, while being housed in a public university, is a for-profit consulting group. The institute signed an $82,000 contract with the Castro Valley School District to develop ethnic studies. Overall, for the 2021 to 2022 school year, $50 million of taxpayer dollars were appropriated for local educational agencies to fund ethnic studies.
Dr. Wu, would you like to address question 2?
I'm talking about question 2.
I think she did.
Yes.
Okay.
So, this being said, this part of my opposition would be greatly tamed if proponents can prove the altruist nature of their support for ethnic studies by offering professional services free of charge. I also would love to assume the best and the seriousness of pro-ethnic studies academics. After all, authors of the 2021 research paper wrote, "Mandating the wide-scale availability of ethnic studies through policy without thoughtful curricular development and teacher training may not produce the educational gains we document here." I appreciate this kind of intellectual humility. I reckon that proponents can make their proposal for large-scale implementation much more reasonable and even appealing if they heed this piece of advice. Last but not least, I also wonder if the guardrails imposed by AB 101 can be faithfully observed and maintained in actuality. AB 101 imposed specific guardrails. Ideally, I think these promises can be kept as long as some radical sentiments can be kept at bay.
Good. Thank you so much, Dr. Wu. And next I'd like to introduce Nicole Bernstein, who is from Southern California. She's the co-founder of an organization called Peer K-12, and the website for Peer K-12 says, "Mobilizing communities, engaging policymakers, and ensuring that no student or family ever feels alone is our commitment in the fight for the protection of Jewish civil rights in K-12 environments." Welcome, Nicole.
You. Well, I think I'm going to take Tab's idea and also start with the second question. The concerns and reservations that I have about my own position in opposition of ethnic studies is that I do believe that a lot of people really think that ethnic studies can be a good thing. I believe them because I was one of them. And I really bought into these ideas about uplifting marginalized voices. I'm an Israeli American. My parents were immigrants. I was born in this country. I never saw myself in any curriculum, in any class ever. This sounded like something that would be amazing. The problem is that, when you're saying something is going to do this, but then in actuality, the behavior and the results are this, the disconnect between those two is confusing. And, being an avid reader and, I wanted to understand why. Why was there such a disconnect between what everyone keeps telling us that ethnic studies is supposed to be versus what it is in actuality in the classroom with the students. And again, I do believe that there are many, many teachers who teach ethnic studies and do it in an incredibly thoughtful and balanced way. However, that is actually not what the experts who invented ethnic studies say that it should be. And in fact, they are often incredibly offended whenever the term good ethnic studies or constructive ethnic studies is used, because they feel that that is a bastardization of the discipline that they created. They invented it, right? And I believe that you should believe people when they tell you what they think and what they are doing and what they want you to do. And the more I looked into this and the more I read about it, the clearer this picture became. And I'm going to read a quote from Jorge Pacheco, and he is one of the 18 ethnic studies experts who were chosen in California to create the model curriculum a few years back, because he's an expert. This is their world that they created. Quote, "The Marxist underpinnings of ethnic studies scare people away." This is something he said during a teacher training, because he is the teacher trainer in Santa Clara County for all teachers who will be teaching ethnic studies. He's the one who trains them. He was also on the committee who created the first draft that had to be vetoed 3 times. So his view is that the Marxist underpinnings of ethnic studies do scare people away. However, teachers must be grounded in the correct politics in order to tackle the white colonialist regime of the USA, as it is a parasitic system that must be dismantled. Now, as an American, that is shocking to me. I don't believe that the vast majority of people who think ethnic studies is something to be supported is supposed to actually do what I just read. And I think that is why there is so much debate about ethnic studies in this country. I will also say that as a mandate, this has been one of the biggest failures in California's educational history. The other, of course, being what was already mentioned, the fact that 2 out of every 3 students in California cannot read or do math at grade level. Why are we wasting so much time on Marxist, revolutionary, white colonialist regime takedowns when our kids can't read? We're not doing our kids the service that they deserve, all of them, in an equitable fashion. Every single student in this state should be able to know how to read at grade level, and we are not able to do that.
Nicole, Terrific. Right at 5 minutes. And so our final panelists on this side, again, I want to remind our audience to have your questions ready to submit in the form that will be in the chat in a minute, or actually in about 5 minutes when our next guest finishes his comments. And that is Phil Stembler. Phil is a husband, father, and public corruption prosecutor born and raised in Newport Beach, California. He and his wife graduated from the same local schools that their children now attend. He ran for school board in 2024 in the Newport Mesa School District on a platform centering on empowering parents and ensuring that local schools are dedicated to academic excellence. Welcome, Phil. Oops, you got your hit your mute button.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thank you, Ken, and I appreciate the introduction. And I'm going to piggyback on Nicole's last point. My objection and my opposition to ethnic studies stems from the fact that ethnic studies hurts the very people that it purports to help. And if you look at the most recent data for 11th graders in the state of California, only 27.9% are proficient in math and 55.73% are proficient in English. And those numbers drop below 20% for Black and Hispanic students in math, and they drop below 50% and 40% for Black and Hispanic students in English proficiency. So spending $276 million a year to implement a curriculum that has no impact on the skills that our students need to succeed when they're done with high school and to be citizens in our communities is a travesty. And as a taxpayer and a parent, I find that it's unacceptable. And it's been widely reported on this racial and ethnic gap, achievement gap. It has only grown wider since COVID, despite our best efforts. And I think that this is, before we are talking about things like ethnic studies, we should be talking about the basics. So another point I'd like to make is that when we're talking about spending taxpayer dollars and implementing and creating large-scale programs like this, we have to, effort and intentions are nice, but we have to think about results. And what is the bottom line? And the study, there's only one study that was cited, and I've heard the other panelists, but there's actually no evidence that the ethnic studies course does anything academically for any of the students in that class. And that there's one study cited in the California model curriculum, and it's been debunked. And there's a white paper published by the FAIR organization, August 20th. I don't have time to summarize it here, but you can go through it. They found that really there's no evidence it does anything. And the main goal and the main benefit it seems to have is, maybe emotional for the students or therapeutic. But do we need to have an ethnic studies curriculum to achieve that end? I'd say the answer is no. A second issue is it's institutionalized discrimination. And, that's a fact. And if you look at AB 715, you've got a committee led by Al Muratashi, one of the individuals who also signed off and supported AB 101, creating the mandate. Now we've got the same folks who created the mandate, creating a law to regulate ethnic studies. And it's not just about anti-Semitism. Some of the provisions in AB 715 are that the instructional materials must be public record and available to students, and requiring that the course not vilify or discriminate. I mean, imagine that. We have to have a law that says you cannot discriminate when you teach ethnic studies. That is absurd. But that's where we're at in California.
Bill,
And
did you want to address question 2?
I'll get to that. I have one more point I'd like to make. And then the final thing that a lot of other folks have hit on is that this field is imbued with politics. And with respect to Professor Camarillo, who spoke at the beginning, There are benefits to ethnic studies, and this, I guess, kind of weaves in my question or answer to question two. There are benefits. It's good to learn about other cultures. It's good to learn about history, like and accurate history, and I support those goals. But the problem with ethnic studies is it arose from a radical 60s movement, and it's imbued with a certain political point of view. And I'd argue that ethnic studies is increasing the polarization in our society. It's not decreasing it. It's harming our political discourse. It's not helping it. And as a counter example or a counter hypothetical, imagine a religious studies course where the ostensible goal was to teach students about different religions. But of course, with the religious studies course, there's the religious viewpoints on abortion and other kind of social topics. There's no question that would be seen as political. And I can wrap up my answer to question two really quick. I would say that two concerns I have is the sunk costs that districts have put into complying with this mandate that didn't end up being a mandate, and that the fact that there actually is demand from students to take this course and from teachers to teach the course. And I would say, to deal with that, I would say let's just leave it as an elective. We don't need to mandate this. We don't need to mandate institutional discrimination. We don't need to mandate political indoctrination. If people wish to go seek that out, they can go do that. So my solution would be to just let folks take it as an elective.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Phil. Now we're going to take a very short pause while you have an opportunity to click on the link in the chat if you'd like to submit a question to the group of people you see on the screen, not Mary and me, but the four people who have expressed concerns about ethnic studies. So go ahead and take a moment to submit your questions. Mary, I want to
If I
ask
make
you
just one little comment to something
Sure.
Phil said, just about AB 715. You'd mentioned that it's shocking that we would need a piece of legislation to state that you're not allowed to discriminate against students in classrooms. But the truth is, we already have that existing in Ed Code. It's part of Ed Code. It's part of California law. It's actually part of federal law. And so what we're seeing is just endless cycles of wasted time, wasted money, wasted resources, wasted efforts on passing a bill that actually just kind of says what we already have in existing law, but that isn't being, it is not being implemented.
I appreciate the follow-up to the 715, AB 715 bill. Mary, I just want to turn and see, do you have some questions so that you can?
I have a lot of them, and it's tricky because these are way more complicated for me to just pull. So I'm doing my best. There are several that are saying if students are engaged in the learning and have a connection to their cultures, which like someone said, when I grew up, it was, women weren't in textbooks, men were predominant, and it was mainly white men. Wouldn't it help connect students, encourage them to be more involved in school? Questions like that it might actually encourage greater academic success. And connected to that, there are people that are sharing in my district, the ethnic studies is rigorous. It involves critical thinking, a lot of writing. There's a real pushback to that. It's not teaching the basic skills, but it's embedded with basic skills as a tool. So
I think, can I jump in? Because I think that
you
would
want to
be,
go first? Then go ahead.
Yeah, I think that with regards to that class in that specific district, that's very subjective. I don't know how you can quantify that. I participated in my school districts when all of these, reviews that we had done over proposed curriculum, And one of the biggest concerns I had was how not rigorous it was. It seemed really almost less than basic. Dealt a lot with emotions, a lot of feelings all the time. And while I think it's great to be able to express your feelings and to talk about them, I don't really think that that belongs in a classroom when, as we said before, we've got really dismal test scores and results in the basics. And I feel again like this is an elective, not for an elective for college age, not for middle school or elementary school, certainly.
Gab, you want to respond to the question?
Yeah, I think I would kind of echo what Nicole said. I mean, if they're, it is a very, very subjective to say, hey, this is a great course for people. But when you delved in, when we're setting a policy for a statewide or even a district-wide thing, we have to rely on facts and figures. We have to rely on whether or not this is actually contributing to that student's ultimate success. And when Phil mentioned a bunch of stats, as well as I mentioned a bunch of stats, the numbers that I presented are statewide, and they do go up dramatically when you're talking about challenged students, students in minority groups. So the 1 out of 4 students chronically absent goes up to, 3 and 4 of chronically absent in one school district. So it's not connecting students if they're not there in the classroom. And if we don't return to the basics and give kids a clean, safe, and academically rigorous environment, they're not going to be able to take that next step to contribute to their own lives or our society.
Phil, your response to the question.
Yeah, and I think that I got a little feedback there, but I think that the learning about other cultures and learning about histories of different groups, that's the good of ethnic studies. But then the bad is the institutionalized discrimination and the indoctrination and the opportunity costs that we have from a mandate. So my sense is, why can't we just have history classes? Why can't we have English language arts classes, literature classes? Why can't we have just our regular classes addressing these things that are the good of ethnic studies, so that we don't have to have all the baggage and divisiveness that it brings?
Thank you. Mary, another question?
Several people have asked, since some of the statements have been made, do you actually have data that this actually hurts students? Because there are teachers and other people saying that their students got more engaged in reading, they got more engaged with going to school, they got more involved in academic studies because of it. So they're wondering, where's the data that this is harming students? So there's several. Again, it's hard to pull these out, so I'm doing my best.
That's all right.
So I can
Nicole,
take
you
that
want to
one.
respond to that?
Yeah.
Phil, why don't you
You
go
start
now?
with Nicole. Phil
Yeah.
will come to you in a
No,
second.
it's okay. Phil can go because I jumped in before.
Okay. Go
Yeah, I
ahead,
feel
Phil.
like this was kind of to my opening statement there. So the data, the proof is in the pudding on that one. The price tag on this was $276 million in 2021 when it was signed off. That's from the Senate Appropriations Committee. And has ethnic studies ever been funded in the history of ethnic studies? The answer is no. It never has been, and that's because of the opportunity cost. Our legislature just has too many other priorities than spending money on this. So I would start there. And then you can go down the list. You can look at AB 715. That's another acknowledgement from the legislature, and not necessarily on academic harm, but on harm in the form of discrimination and dissemination of inaccurate information in this course. So I'd say that the data is there, just from what's actually happened. It's historical.
Nicole, what are the question was, what evidence is there that this is having a negative or could have a negative effect on students?
Okay, well, first of all, I think when you have a situation like what we've seen the past, I will say 2 years in California, with regards to how many lawsuits and Office of Civil Rights complaints and actual California Department of Education investigations into practices in school districts that violate the civil rights of Jewish and Israeli American students, it is nothing less than shocking. Okay. Now, in Oakland, in December of 2024, you had more than 40 Jewish families pull their children from public school because the school could not guarantee the safety of their Jewish children. I don't know what more needs to happen for people to accept that maybe there's something amiss. Maybe what we thought we were getting isn't what we actually got. And we really need to figure out why before we keep pushing forward. There's a reason why in the last 3 years, there have been, I want to say, 12 lawsuits across school districts in California that deal with ethnic studies discrimination and harm caused to Jewish and Israeli American students. What more needs to happen for this marginalized community to be heard? And, you know, I often wonder where the disconnect is between the, you know, centering marginalized voices and the absolute abuse that Jews and Israeli Americans receive in K through 12 and
Nicole,
in college.
let me just ask a quick follow-up question to you. Eliminating or not having an ethnic studies course isn't going to solve the problem you just talked about. What do you think would solve that problem?
Well, you know, the ethnic studies itself is actually a deeper issue that I believe has opened up the Pandora's box as to what exactly is going on with this ideological shift in our educational systems. When you see, you know, I think, let me see the stats, 79% of all Americans under the age of 25 believe that all white people are oppressors and that all people of color are oppressed, no matter what. What does that say about Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey? List any, you know, African American who has found success through hard work and perseverance. What does that say about them? 67% of Americans under 25 believe that all Jews are white oppressors. My parents were Holocaust survivors. We're not white. Weren't white enough for Hitler, but now all of a sudden we're the oppressors. There's so many more stats. You have 60% of Americans under 25 openly supporting Hamas, a known terrorist organization. They believe Hamas is the good guy in this fight.
So
like,
I'm going to,
the problem.
I'm just going to just leave the question for people to ponder, which is that if, to the extent those are problems, I'm wondering how schools can address that. And I think just eliminate, I think what you're saying, tell me if I have this right, is that ethnic studies course exacerbates the problem, but
well,
eliminating it wouldn't
ethnic
necessarily
studies is a very
solve
nicely packaged version of this ideology. And, you know, I have to wonder about when you look at over the last 20 years, the education achievement has gone down while spending has gone up. But why is that? What are we spending our money on? Right. So we have to do an audit and we have to look into and see, are we not teaching real history in history class that we would need something? What's going on there? No one's ever done that audit.
Okay.
So this may give an opportunity for the people with their hands up to also respond. So people are saying, you have to remember ethnic studies isn't in many, many schools. So this is a statement here. So a lot of what you're saying has not been caused by ethnic studies. So they're saying, how could you, in addition to the current high school curriculum, how could you help high school students from all backgrounds feel more seen in their education and their society as they proceed into adulthood? What would make a good way to approach learning of all cultures, whether it's in ethnic studies or just like Phil mentioned, embedded in other courses?
When you end, would you be willing to respond to that question? What would help students learn about one another and appreciate one another's cultures in a way that you think would be healthy?
Can I respond by emphasizing what is not going to be helpful first?
Yes, yeah, and then
So,
if you could get to the second part,
I,
what would be helpful? Because I
sure.
think that's the big question for me, at least, maybe people out in the audience too.
It's a big question that um, commands difficult or very long answers, but I will try to get to it. I want to point out a an interview that I did with some students regarding the general atmosphere or environment in their schools in a high school district in recent years. The students said, and I quote, kids from different backgrounds naturally mingle and interact through sports, classes, extracurriculars, and robotics teams. But now people are walking on eggshells. They're afraid to give critiques, unquote. So this is not unique to the implementation of ethnic studies curriculum, which is not in all over 1,000 school districts throughout California. It's in a lot of the classes or the literature that emphasize, or there is a one-sided narrative that Americans must be different, and the common expectations are somehow to be frowned upon. There is also a heavy focus on forms of oppression, marginalization, and past rounds of discrimination. But what is common to being American?
So
Are there
really,
any uplifting stories that can unify our experience? So I
so
think
if you would just, could you talk a little bit about what is the way forward? How do we, even aside as you point out, this is not just because of ethnic studies. It's
sure.
what do you recommend school educators do to address the problem you're talking about?
I think it's important for students to be exposed and encouraged to seek and see a different perspective, one that celebrates empowerment, agency, and the American dream, and one that allows space for honest disagreements. I think that's a good starting point. Whether or not this is the answer, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that we should also be learning about our experiences as a country, as Americans, which have created a world powerhouse and shining example of democratic self-governance. What about that? What about the positive parts? And I think a lot of these classes just have this crude dichotomy that is very typical of an ideological framework that is typical of things like critical or liberated ethnic studies.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Tab, I'm going to let you respond real quickly, and then we're gonna shift to the next part of the conversation.
Okay, well, I mean, I'll address it. And I think Phil kind of addressed it in his thing. There's only a certain amount of hours that kids have in school, and we are materially damaging students because, one, we know they're not attending. 1 out of 5 are not attending. We know that when they're there, many students aren't safe. 88% increase in violence against teachers, 300% increase in violence by or on students, and our academic failures, where a majority can't do math, a bare majority can do English, and only 20% can pass the same civic exam that an immigrant has to pass. So it's materially damaging because you're taking teachers away from that mission. Dr. Camarillo mentioned a lot of teachers are overworked. 17% of teachers right now in current subjects aren't even experts in their own field. So adding another field is going to, again, distract even further away from that core mission of our schools. And that's, I think, my largest objection.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I thank all 4 of you for sharing your perspectives and your deep concerns about ethnic studies. If you raise your hand, I'll be happy to call on it. Anyone want to share a takeaway from today? Tab?
Yeah, I mean, and particularly, and I think it was Samantha, the student. I mean, I really took away how important it is for us to find ways to connect with students, to make sure that it's not just a rigid academics, but actually we have a little bit deeper thing. And I think that's an important thing that we or me as a conservative needs to keep in mind, that not everyone, sometimes you do have to see somebody who looks like you, sounds like you, or has your experiences in order to translate what you're learning into something in your real life.
Thank you, Tom, for sharing the other takeaways. Albert?
Yes, well, again, thank you for hosting this, and comments from our colleagues on both sides. One takeaway, there is no room in any classroom for discrimination. And when it's found out, when it's discovered, it's called out. But to generalize, to have broad stroke statements about a very diverse curriculum now being taught literally by hundreds of students, got to be very careful about the generalizations made. That broad stroke define something that is really a curriculum that is emerging. It's being taught by our teachers now. There'll be more in the future. If you have an opportunity, and I would say this to everyone that's listening, if you have an opportunity to connect with a teacher who's teaching ethnic studies, reach out to them, because you need to see what's being actually taught, the pedagogy, the nature of the curriculum, and the impact of students. And I'm seeing a lot of that now as I reach out to teachers at school districts, not only in the Bay Area, but now increasingly throughout California. And let that be the basis for you making determinations about this curriculum. And that is someone, yes, I support it, but is someone that is seeing the best of what teachers offer. And we've heard from some of them today. This is something our society critically needs right now, to be able to have students and future adult citizens of our state and our country to be able to interact. And if we can give them the kind of information that allows them to process things, to see people differently, but to understand and respect them, because that's critical, right? That's the foundation of ethnic studies in an important way from its origin to today. That's the takeaway for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Albert. I want to go to.
Can I just thank Albert for that comment? And I wish that you were this standard, right? But I have to be honest with you. And this is maybe something I would love to connect with you offline and show you my experience and what my community is dealing with, and why there's so much pain and hurt about the curriculum's origin, about how it's manifesting in classrooms. I really don't think that there's an understanding in the general population, because the Jewish population is less than 2% of California, of the country. We're a tiny little minority. I think the only marginalized group that is smaller than us in numbers is perhaps the indigenous Native Americans. And so I would welcome an opportunity to really connect with you, but for real, and share what I'm experiencing in my community, so that we can figure out how we can move forward, so that everybody wins. You know what I mean? Like, I really
Nicole,
appreciate your comment.
I want to urge you to reach out. If you look up his name at Stanford University, you'll find his email address. But I really would urge you to reach out and have a conversation with Dr. Camarillo, and to come away with it with some ideas about what can be done to address the concerns that you have. Because what I heard you say, Nicole, is that you're not necessarily opposed to ethnic studies if it's done well, if it's done the way that Dr. Camarillo was describing. But the question is, how do we move forward in a way that accomplishes that and doesn't cause the kind of harm that you're describing? Phil,
So wait, sorry, just want to clarify that, because that's not how I feel. I feel that the people who invented ethnic studies deserve to be the ones to define it. I'm not the one who gets to define it, right? And because of how it is defined and because of how they intend for it to be taught, whether someone like Albert or Karen or Summer or anybody else actually does in the classroom, that's actually one of the issues, is that it's very subjective and depends on the teacher. You could get lucky. I can promise you that the vast majority, almost all Jews in the state of California have not been lucky.
Okay.
So I would prefer that we teach real history in history and uplift in all the other topics, and give all students an opportunity to shine in their own ways.
Thank you. Yeah. I'll kind of jump off of what I was planning to say, is kind of a jumping off point from what Nicole was saying. And, respectfully, Professor Camarillo, what you're describing is not what is in the California model curriculum, which I've read. It says in the California model curriculum, it says that critical race theory is a key theoretical framework. That's page 45 of the model curriculum. And that framework says that racism is embedded within systems and institutions that replicate racial inequity, inequality, codified in law, embedded in structures, woven into public policy. So according to the state of California model curriculum, every aspect of American life is embedded in racism. And so what you're describing is what I would say is the good of ethnic studies, but the way it's being implemented and the way that the model curriculum was written is highly political, highly divisive. And, I think that, this is a question that Ken had for Nicole, and I disagreed with the very premise of the question. I think that the ethnic studies curriculum, as the mandate, as codified in the curriculum, actually increases the prejudice and discrimination against the Jewish community, propagates it, inflames it, and turns it into a bigger snowball or fireball than it was before. And it does that just based to its core for what it is. And we've seen Santa Ana Unified not get called out, get sued and lose a lawsuit, where school board members were talking about having meetings on Jewish holidays so that
the
members
Jews
of that
won't
community
interfere. Yeah.
Right. So that's what we've seen. That's a key. I mean, these are facts. So I think that, to go back to what I said at the beginning, I think it's a travesty that we have this massive achievement gap between racial groups in this country. We need to solve that, or in this state.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
that's what we got to get to.
Yeah.
Thank you, Phil. And we're going to come to John Festerwald, a journalist. And John, are you going to speak as a parent or a journalist or as an observer? What role are you speaking as?
As a journalist and someone who's been listening to the discussion, and as I'm a parent, but I'll let my 33-year-old daughter decide for herself on these issues. What Phil said just now is true. It happened in Santa Ana. The parents were discouraged. The remarks were there and documented in court. Santa Ana is not stand for every district in this state of California. It's 1,000 districts. I think that what I heard today, eloquently stated by so many, how difficult it is to reach an agreement on ethnic studies. And I think that's a shame, because if we go back to the original goal of ethnic studies, which is to create empathy and understanding for students of people who are different from them, and how in the diversity in California, somehow we can get back to the goal. And I don't think it's Pollyannish to say that. It's possible, but one of the ways that you do it would be, I think, in schools, they all have controversial courses, policies. And if districts followed their own rules on this, and dealt with it honestly and forthrightly, and recognized that ethnic studies shouldn't be the exception to those policies, although ethnic studies presents perspectives of race and struggles it's from a different perspective. And therefore, I happen to think that critical race theory is one of those things which need to be raised and discussed. It's not the only one, clearly. And it should be in the context of the way other courses are taught, with stressing independent thinking, open discussion, and involving parents in the creation of that curriculum so that it's not thrown upon them. I think there are ways through this to perhaps reach some middle ground and go back to the original intent of it.
Great.
I guess that's my journals, but it's also my opinion.
Yeah, great. Thank you, John. Summer, I'd love to hear from you.
Sure, thank you. I think that something I'm taking away from this conversation is that all of us on both sides agree that our educational system has problems and needs serious improvement, and we want to see our students improve. And I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat as well, like expressing that our students need more support to truly succeed. I'm leaving this conversation feeling concerned about the framing of the concerned side, the narrow framing, seeing ethnic studies as an extra thing to add on without considering that it might be integrated into what we're already doing, or replacing the way that we teach history. And especially this language around our students getting back to the basics is really problematic to me. I think that our students deserve more than just the basics, and the basics have not been engaging them thus far. And we need to be innovating and thinking about what are the ways that our students who have not felt included or part of our educational system, how do we bring them in? Because it has not been working what we've been doing. And when folks say that there's a lot of fear around teaching about white supremacy, the fact of the matter is, it is something that is a theory that students will be exposed to. We're not critiquing, and no one's teaching that all white people are racist. We're teaching that whiteness and white supremacy ideology is something that permeates our society and is something that we need to examine. And so the data that's being thrown around by a lot of folks, I think, is not super relevant to the conversation. And instead, I think that folks need to firsthand witness an ethnic studies classroom and then come into these conversations with more firsthand experience, because it's really concerning to me that data around math is being used as reasoning for why we don't need a history and social sciences class. It's not really making sense to me, but I see the common ground. I'm also feeling a bit concerned.
Samantha, I want to give you a chance to chime in here. Do you have a takeaway or two that you want to share about today?
Yes, I do. So again, I want to thank you for this opportunity. But my main takeaway would probably be how inquisitive everyone was. And that goes for all the panelists and spectators, because it's great to see how eager everyone was to hear out our standpoints on ethnic studies, especially given how heavily debated this topic is. And we really just all want to come up with a solution just as much as any other person. But as a student standpoint, what I am taking away from this as well is that it's kind of complex to really see this curriculum, just because school to me is a community, and I'm sure it's like that for any other student as well. And ethnic studies, we're surrounded with people with many different backgrounds.
Samantha, you're breaking up just a little bit, I'm afraid.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, maybe another 30 seconds or so. I don't want to
Oh no, it's okay. Yeah. So
cut you off, but you're breaking up just a little bit.
Got it. Okay. So like again, like I was saying, as a student standpoint, I think that ethnic studies should be something that can be taught, especially because very diverse backgrounds, meeting people all over the place, and overall having that established in high school would better prepare students for college and overall just the real world.
So can we just get to
Phil,
the
I'm afraid I'm going to have to close it.
Yeah.
Bring it to a close, because we're just about a few minutes away and we need to do a couple of things. But I just, one takeaway, going back to Mary talking about why we selected a fishbowl format, the idea was to encourage listening and curiosity and treating one another with dignity. I felt that was happening. I mean, I don't know what's going on in your minds, but the tone of the conversation, the way people regarded one another, I felt, I hope you did too, that it was done with a tone of dignity and not contempt. I hope people learned something from the perspectives that were shared. What I want to do now is and I hope the people out there listening will just hang on a minute, because we have a form that will go in the chat. It's just a place for you to give Braver Angels and Courageous Conversations about our schools feedback on how today went, what worked well for you, and what we could do better. But I want to just thank, first of all, our panelists. And I also want to thank our event sponsors, the Pro-Human Foundation, Living Room Conversations, the Listen First Project. I want to thank John Fensterwald from EdSource for participating in this and giving us sort of a very quick factual background on ethnic studies in California. I want to thank my co-moderator, Mary Thomas Valens, and the amazing folks from Braver Angels working behind the scenes to really work tirelessly for a long time making this thing happen. And most of all, I want to thank all of you out in the audience for tuning into this live broadcast. We'll be in touch with you soon about how you can access video and audio recordings of today's event, and where you can see the unanswered questions and actually this amazing chat that I've just occasionally had a chance to look at, which we'll include so you can see what people had to say. One last thing, there's a link in the chat that will take you to a short feedback form. I just mentioned that a moment ago. Please take a few minutes to respond to a few questions that will provide useful information to all of us at Braver Angels and Courageous Conversations about our schools. Again, thanks for tuning in. Thanks to panelists. Thanks to all of you who are here today. Take care.
Thank you. Albert, let's talk.
Okay. Bye-bye.